So what reactions do you have? Thoughts about the film? Questions? There's some mics down here and maybe up there somewhere. What thoughts do you have? I've seen it a few times before, so I won't tell you my reactions.
I got a real sense of your identity as a musician watching this film. A lot of what I saw was coming down to the close-ups of a guitar, the jazz band, etc. I was a little surprised to see that you did not do the music in the film. I'm curious, though, what do you play?
I play guitar. And
did you bring it? Are we going to hear anything?
No, not tonight. Not tonight.
And will you talk about the music component of the film?
Okay, the music was, some of the music was found music. Some, like the one song I really love is the song from El Salvador with the Guevara family. I found a Salvadorian music band outside of Washington, D.C., and I tracked them down and talked to the composer and the lead singer, and I said, can we use your song? And he said, well, I don't really own it. The Smithsonian owns it, because he had been in some Folkways recording of it. So I tracked down the director of the Smithsonian thing, and they said, a film about immigration? Sure, you can use it. So I had to fill out some forms. But a lot of the other music was done by my friend Greg Allen, who's a music collaborator now. He's a wonderful fiddle player and guitar player and songwriter, and plays in Lawrence in a gypsy jazz band every month, playing Django Reinhardt songs and things like that. So he did a lot of the original music, and also did the sound mix, which was very complex because we shot in a lot of different settings. There was a lot of noise that we had to remove. And I don't know, those of you saw it before, in the old days, you might have noticed how smooth the sound sounds now. It was a huge job to get that sound design done. But Greg did a brilliant job on it.
Was there accordion too?
Was there what?
Accordion.
There was some accordion sound in there, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Other thoughts, reactions? Anybody here from Garden City? Aha. Every time we've shown this film, all 24 times, there have been people in the audience from Garden City. That's really great. Yeah.
I was so struck by the sincere compassion in some of the young people who spoke, and my thoughts went to churches and faith systems, and I wondered if you knew if churches were purposely teaching the love your neighbor concept of many faith systems, including Christianity, or if they were more creed-based and what are you going to believe? Can you address that?
Well, I can say, and Deborah could comment on this, the notion that Sister Janice said that there was a discussion, are we going to have this be a blessing or a curse? This was in the planning. They knew when they built that plant, when it was approved, that it was going to bring thousands of new jobs, and there was not much unemployment in town then. And a lot of people that were second, third, fourth generation citizens wouldn't really want to work in the beef plant. Although there was a time, not that, a couple of decades before, having a job in a beef plant was one of the highest paid American factory jobs. But that changed with changes in the beef industry over the years. But so the ministerial alliance that Lavetta Rollman talked about was very active in the early days, along with people from the city, and they really made a very concerted effort to be welcoming, and it was a challenge. It was not without opposition. But as far as the young people, when we first came out there, we didn't know much about Garden City, so we were really researchers in a way. We were trying to figure out what's the story here. But when we walked into the high school and spent about an hour in there, we knew that the high school kids were going to be a major factor in the film because they had a kind of genuine authenticity and a kind of camaraderie among them that was so amazing and refreshing. And that I showed this film the other day at the Nelson Gallery in Kansas City, And somebody said, when the adults were talking, I was sort of zoning out, but every time the kids came on, I perked up. Well, that's the way we felt, not to put the adults down in the film, but the kids had a kind of spark to them, and all they have ever known is the diversity that you see, because if you're 18 years old, the beef plant was built in 1980, what else have you known except diversity? In fact, the football player, the football star, the kid Jasper in a red shirt, he told me that when he got to middle school, a friend of his from middle school that had not gone to his elementary school said to him, "You were the only white boy in your elementary, weren't you?" And he said, I thought about it and I thought, wait a minute, I was. He had never kind of paid attention to it. And I heard stories like that a lot. At first, I couldn't quite believe them, but the more I was hearing it, if you grow up only in a diverse context, you don't think about color in the same way or race or differences in the same way. I heard that from several people. But I wonder what else you might want to say about the kids.
I don't think I would credit Christianity for the coming together of the people, because we had a large blend of different religions. We have Jewish there, we have, of course, Muslim. We have, let's see, what else? But there's a mix. And I think the creed, more than anything, was we're here in a country where we're not in conflict anymore. So it's like we want to be treated this way, so certainly we're going to come together that way. But I think the city, as I had said before, has always been quite progressive. We heard from Matt Allen, the city manager. I wouldn't say the same again about the county leaders, but the city leaders have a long history of being progressive thinkers and always being very welcoming.
And I think another thing that I noticed, you know, when I talked to the police chief, it was in our first week we set up a studio in the museum. We didn't know what the shape of the film would be, and we just had lined up a ton of interviews. And so I met the police chief. I'd known him for 5 minutes when we interviewed him. And to hear the leader of the law enforcement community say something without any hesitation to a stranger with the camera on him, say there's no room for division in this community over the color of your skin, your country of origin, your sexual preference. There's no room for hatred. When the leadership are saying things like that, it sets a tone. After the interview, I said to him, "So, Chief, what would happen if you find out that one of your officers is a racist?" And he said to me, "That officer would not be here very long." So if the leadership takes an inclusive position, it becomes less popular to express a more bigoted point of view. And it's not that there are not people that are against the changes. We looked hard to find somebody who would speak to the more negative side of it. It was very hard to find anybody. Now, I'm sure there were. But the two people that I was pretty certain would speak against all the changes, one of them was our friend, the RV mechanic, Kevin, who said strangers in town, and that's where we thought of the title. And it turns out, though, that he later said, I've changed over the years. I'm fine with everything here. And if any other culture wants to come in, any other race, any other ethnicity, if they're okay with us, I'm okay with them. So there is an atmosphere. Another thing that I would say as a filmmaker, something happened that my friend Ruben and I and our friend Jim, we've never encountered. No one said no when we asked if we could interview them on camera. Now that's never happened in a documentary. Usually somebody doesn't want to be on camera, but everybody said yes to the request to interview. Or we'd be in a restaurant, can we film in here? Sure, go right ahead. And there was some parallel between the openness of people willing to tell their story and the atmosphere of people coming in from the outside, because we were outsiders. They didn't know us. So I was very impressed with that. We named the town that doesn't say no. Other thoughts, reactions? How about from some of you Garden Cityans? Do you see your town in there? Yeah?
Hi. I'm here because this is extra credit for one of my classes. But
How much extra credit?
But
And did you withhold any money from the Ukraine?
I really appreciate that you went through all the trouble to make this documentary. One of the things that really spoke to me in this video was how there was that one young man. He was talking about how when there were basically terrorist attacks from the locals attacking them, like he was frightened, but compared to a lot of those countries where those people came from, where they had already experienced a lot of guerrilla warfare and things like that, he said that the people came together and they loved him and they showed him so much support and he loved them back. And that's a really big thing. Like, it's a really big change for people when they come from a place where the majority is against them and they come to a place where the majority is for them.
Right.
And you feel so much support and power because of those people. And I just really appreciate Garden City being such a beautiful place where people don't have to be afraid anymore. Because going to a new place as an immigrant is really scary. It's really scary. People don't realize how scary it is. And like, not every place is welcoming. And I'm trying not to cry. But I'm just so thankful. I'm so thankful for Garden City. Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much. Speaking of tough immigrant stories, the Fernando story, who he had never told his classmates. We were filming something else in that theater, and somebody said you should ask Fernando if he would tell you his story. And I asked him. He was not documented. He was just turned 18. He was facing deportation, probably within a month or two. And he said, I'd like to tell my story. And I said, are you sure? He said, yes, I want to. So he told his classmates for the first time. Well, so he self-deported to avoid a court hearing where he would have been officially deported. But I'm happy to say he now lives in Long Island, New York. His father was able to bring him back legally. His parents didn't raise him. He was raised by his grandmother. But he got back on a legal status, and he's working and living in Long Island.
Hello. Thank you for showing this film and producing it. I'm John Walter, proud 2008 graduate of Garden City. And I've been waiting since I heard that you were producing the film to have a chance to see it. Because growing up in Garden City has informed so much of my worldview. And I love that place so much.
You're not getting homesick on me now, are you?
Oh, I am. The one thing that I just wanted to ask further is that, it's so cool to see so many, friends and family, friends and family members of friends featured in this. You were only able to showcase just a small percentage of the beautiful and wonderful stories in that community. And I was just curious, what other stories are there that maybe you weren't able to get as deep into, or what you would have liked to have pursued further given the time, the money, and just the availability that
It's a very good question. We were in Garden City for 4 different weeks of filming, where we worked 35-hour days for 4 weeks. And we were pretty exhausted. We would come back when we were staying with them. We'd come back to Deborah and Dale's house and just collapse, although we kind of took over their living room with editing equipment and all kinds of junk. But in 4 weeks, we shot just many hours of interviews and film, and there were a lot of stories that we couldn't include. One of the things I wished we had had time to include, and we tried, but it didn't work, I wanted to get one of the Asian or African families into the film. And it was tricky. Many of the African family people are there not with their families. Some are, but there are a lot of like Mersal, there are a lot of younger African people who haven't been there that long. They haven't been there for 20 years, and their families aren't with them. Many of them, like one of the people said, he wants to go back and see his family, or the other one said, I want to help my family. A dream many of them had would be to bring their immediate family over if they got established and could become citizens. And so we were not able to get an African family or a Burmese family to one of the families where we were able to interview the mom in the family, an African woman. She did not want her children in the film at all. She grew up in displaced persons camps, and it just made her very anxious, the thought of having her kids in a big film like this. But there were many stories that were very fascinating. And some of the people that you met very briefly told much longer stories, but part of the challenge in filmmaking is all the things you have to leave out. And the editing was the toughest part. Going out there and working hard and filming was fascinating. And a lot of things just happened, and we happened to be there to catch them. But we felt incredibly fortunate to get the stories we got. Whitney Kinney, who was part of the Mesa family and once taught at the high school, I don't know if she was still there when you were there, but she taught there and now is a dental hygienist. So I was at my dentist getting my teeth cleaned in Lawrence, and this is during the filming, and the 4th of July was coming up, and we were about to go back out there, and she says, so what are you going to do for the 4th of July? And I said, well, I'm going to Garden City. She says, get out of here, Garden City, that's where I was born and grew up. And so she hooked us up with her family. And so things happen. I mean, I met people from Garden City all over the place. There's a barber on Massachusetts Street in Lawrence who grew up in Garden City, went to the high school there. So there were so many stories, and so much is left out. Any other thoughts, other reactions?
Okay, I'm from Olathe, but I know the Mesas, and Dennis, he actually wrote like a recommendation for me when I was going to like Girls State. It's like a government camp for girls in Kansas, which, but I love the Mesas like so much, like everything like in the film, like their community, the sense of like diversity, hard like work ethic. They share with me like. So Dennis Mesa, his brother is my best friend's grandpa. Okay. And so my dad used to live, but my dad used to live like out in Garden City, and he like always talked about like the community and like diversity. But like the Mesa family, like they always worked like so hard. Yeah. And so Dennis's, I guess, great niece, my best friend Ariella, we're the same age. She's now playing soccer in like Forney, Nebraska, but like their family's great. Like they're awesome.
Great.
So
Excellent.
I'm so proud of all of them.
Yeah, great people.
First, I want to thank you for mentioning that this land was occupied by Native people originally. And so this story is really far more complex, and there's a lot more pain involved than we see. I mean, I really appreciate that you set it up, the context of these people came from war-torn areas. It was their survival.
Right.
And then I'm so glad that you mentioned Fernando's story. And this film just looks so different from when I first saw it, and maybe that's, just my memory. But I'm wondering how extensive your edit was. Like, was Fernando in that first version?
Yeah.
He was. Oh my gosh. Okay, it's me. It's my memory. But because it looks too easy. I mean, I love the way people rise to the occasion, but I wonder about the other hardships, like working in a meat packing plant, and when the man says, my knife was so dull, right. I used the opposite side. There are a lot of injuries that occur.
Yeah.
And I know you couldn't do everything, so you gave us this wonderful feel-good film. Could you tackle this is really much harder than it looks?
The work itself?
Pardon?
You mean with the work in the
Well, I don't know.
packing
Maybe
plant?
It would be, you would tell the story of the true story of how Native people feel about the wave of immigration that hit them.
Mm-hmm.
And
Well, that
how,
would be
that's a very
yeah.
different story.
It's a different story, but you're right. I mean, that area, long before there was a town there, and before it was the border with Mexico, it was a crossing area for right across the river there, from what I understood, for Native peoples coming back and forth. And so, if we really wanted to totally include immigration stories and migration stories, we'd have to go way back before Garden City was there. And when it was the border with Mexico, there was no Garden City. It was just the border at the river, because Garden City came later. But you're right, it's a very complex story. About the beef packing plant, I went out there with kind of a biased, negative attitude about Tyson from other things I've heard about Tyson. And if you read about the history of Tyson, they have quite a checkered past, and there have been huge numbers of injuries. And when Mr. Mendoza first came as a youngster, they didn't do much training. And he had told us about how they didn't even teach him to sharpen his knife. But things have evolved there. The thing that surprised me, we must have spoken to 15 or 20 workers who worked there. Only one of the workers we talked to said some moderately negative things about working there. And one thing about the plant that's interesting, when we were filming there, the starting entry-level wage was $16 an hour, which is higher than the national minimum wage. I think, I'm not an expert in the beef industry, but I think what has happened is that there's a convergence of the business interest of how they want to make their money and treating the workers better, much better than when Mr. Mendoza came, because they've realized that if they don't help the workers learn the job and place them on the right job for their particular physicality, they're going to have more injuries, and then they're going to have more turnover, and then it's going to affect production. So there's now competition for these workers, so the salaries have gone up. And Garden City started paying more money than the other two towns nearby. So the workers actually, except for one guy, said that they like working there, and they're treated respectfully. Now, a whole other film is what's the impact of the beef industry on the environment and the water situation. It's very complicated. A bunch of us ordered veggie burgers tonight at the restaurant upstairs in honor of Tyson. But, I mean, you're right, it's a very complicated story. And this may make it look easy. There were many, many hardships. But I was surprised that people were much more positive who worked there than I expected. I didn't expect that, because the work can be brutal. We met one guy, a Cuban guy, had been there for about 9 months. We met him by the swimming pool the first day. He was riding a bike. He had dreadlocks, and he is a musician himself and a great dancer. And he was illustrating what he does in a kind of dance movement. And he said when he first got there, they gave him 30 days of training, and then they asked him which of these jobs he had experienced did he think he would be best at. And he said if you're on a job there and it wasn't working for you, they'd move you to another one. So apparently they're trying to maintain their workforce, not out of altruism, but out of it helping their bottom line. At least that's the sense I had from talking to people. I don't know if from your thoughts about it, do you have any other thoughts at all? Come on. Well, let it say there, okay.
Well, I have one other question and comment for you. When I first saw the film, I complimented you all for putting the Arkansas River in there, because the river is, of course, life and such an important factor there.
Right.
And to see the people, riding their horses and the dogs and everything, and it gives you that feeling of connection. And I know you didn't have room for all of this, but what fascinates me is how people do connect to a landscape, to the flora, to the fauna. They can love it. And the people who have to leave it, that's very heartbreaking so often, and I'm sure that was an element for some people, but you don't see it because they're, becoming happy in this new place. And it just makes me feel for all people when they love an area and why they love that area, and
right.
If they could just retain those feelings and those cultural connections
To the land
to the land that
Yeah.
birthed them,
Right.
that they generously have gratitude for.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Backstory on the river, it hadn't had water for 15 years, and maybe apparently this was a movie.
Yeah. And half the town was out there waiting in the water. They hadn't seen water forever in that river. It's usually dry. Other thoughts?
Hi. So
Hi.
I have two questions for you. I actually wrote them down so I wouldn't forget them.
Okay.
So I wanted to ask you, so in your film, you're showcasing more of like the cultural development of Garden City. I'm curious to see where you think the culture diversity and the culture development of Garden City will go in the future years when the kids in high school are adults and work like in the working class, or like when they're taking over the places their parents occupy now. So where do you think like society
It's a
in
good question.
that town will go?
It's a good question. I mean, as long as there are jobs there, what people tell me, there'll be more and more new immigrants coming, because many people come into the plant, work there for a while, and then move on. It is the place that always has jobs, although currently the plant is closed because there was a fire there about a month ago. And but they're keeping the full-time employees there, and they're paying them while they're repairing it. But so one thing will be in the future, if the plant continues, there'll be new waves of immigrants. So there'll still be the influx of strangers in town, if we want to call them strangers. But I'm not really sure what will happen over the generations. Some people think that while there's not much competition for those jobs between newcomers and people that are very well established in the beef plant, some people have raised the question of, well, will there be competition a generation or two later when some of these kids who graduate from high school go away to college and then come back to try to find a job? Who will they be competing against for the available jobs for college graduates? I don't know what the answer to that is, but that's always been the case. I mean, that as people get better trained, better educated, they're going to look for higher level jobs. They're not going to go back to the beef plant.
Yeah.
It's tough work. I mean, it's very, very hard work.
Okay.
Do you have a thought about that? I mean, what do you picture would happen there?
I feel like, okay, I'm not a sociologist, but I feel like, because I've seen it with like my family and my friends, my family going off to college and like being immigrants. I am an immigrant from Mexico. Being immigrants, technically, I guess, we go off to college, we get our degrees, or we try to get our degrees, and then we come back to our community. And that's really what we strive for. We come back to our community to help and make it better for the next generations, or our kids, I guess.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I feel like maybe that might happen in Garden City. We'll see. But my second question was, did you, and while you were making the film, did you meet any dreamers or like any DACA students?
There are a number of DACA students there. I don't think we met any directly there. I've met some in Lawrence, but I know there are a bunch of dreamers there.
Okay. Yeah, I
Definitely.
was just wondering if you had like interviewed or like had interviewed any of them and not had space in the film.
No, we didn't find any when we were there. Part of it was the luck of the draw for us. As you saw, the families we had in there were Mexican or Spanish-speaking families, Salvadorian and Mexican families. Ruben, my friend, was a Peace Corps volunteer in Chile, and I learned Spanish in Mexico, so we had more access to Spanish-speaking families, which is another reason it was easier for us in our short time to have multiple families, because we could talk to the folks that weren't fluent in English with our bad Spanish, and they would answer us in Spanish.
Well, that's actually why I was curious, because I know a lot of Spanish families who have DACA students, who have children that are DACA recipients.
Yeah.
So, because you had a lot of Hispanic families in there, so I was just wondering.
Right, yeah. It would have been good. It would have been a good thing to do. Other thoughts?
My name is Joab
Hi.
Samwata, and I have some of my faculty here. I belong to the Department of Sociology, and I'm a native of Kenya, one of the countries in East Africa. So I've been watching your movie. I thought about this conference that I have been invited to in Canada. And this conference has almost a similar theme to the name given to your film. And I was wondering whether you probably might be aware of it, and if there's any connection between your film and this conference that is forthcoming in Canada actually next month. This conference is called 12 Annual Strangers in New Homelands Conference in Canada. And I was thinking, there seems to be some kind of close connection between.
I never heard of it, but it's a good idea. It would be a great idea. Why don't you take the film there and show it there?
Yeah, and so my abstract was accepted, so I'm kind of preparing my paper. Hopefully I can make a presentation in this conference in Canada next month. Yeah. One of the things this particular conference seeks to perhaps do or achieve is to explore ways in which human rights abuses against immigrants, can be somehow dealt with, right? And I'm looking at your movie, I'm looking at your film, I'm thinking, well, kind of it provides some answers, to that problem, right? Like, Garden City seems to be a good example of a city that is welcoming, that is, progressive, as you put it, right? Perhaps it provides an answer to some of this problem that this conference would perhaps be dealing with. I don't know what your thoughts are, sir.
Thank you. Yeah, our original title for the film was Garden City Works. That was our working title. We were trying to figure out what makes it work. But there is something there that, if it can work in Garden City, that people can get along with many languages, many cultures, many racial backgrounds, why can't it work in other places? And people have studied Garden City to try to figure out what makes it work. It's still a little bit elusive, right? Because something happened there where it keeps evolving. There was just a tragedy there just the week before last, I guess, where a community leader, a 69-year-old guy, Ernesto Ortiz, who owned the El Conquistador restaurant, was shot and killed as he was closing the restaurant and left dead in the parking lot. And you saw another kind of reaction of what happens in Garden City with a tragedy like that. The family reopened the restaurant a day or two later because they didn't want the restaurant to be dead along with their family member. Hundreds of people from the town, I heard, came immediately to the restaurant as soon as it opened to show their support. And then there was a huge funeral on Saturday. I don't know how many actually showed up. Dennis Mesa told me they were expecting 1,000 people at the funeral. Because the community has a tendency, like towns much smaller, the whole thing of Kansas, small towns, if somebody died, the town shuts down and everybody goes to the funeral. Well, Garden City's not a tiny town by Kansas standards. I think of tiny towns like Florence, 400, 500 people, things like that. But it seemed like half the town was going to come to the funeral. So the town comes together around a tragedy. It came together when the plant was burned a month ago, came together in 2016 when the bombing plot was foiled. Just everybody seemed to come together. So I don't know what it is. What makes it work?
I think just the long history of that welcoming sense and understanding that, as you know, agriculture is the #1 employer of undocumented immigrants and immigrants, period. So, I'm sorry. I was talking to Steve. Now I forgot what I was saying. Agriculture. Agriculture is the #1 employer of undocumented and documented immigrants. Bar none, agriculture is the #1 employer there. And I think that sense, I think it was said in the film, we've always known, while I'm a transplant, I was in Garden City, we lived there 29 years, we just always knew that that was a really important part of that. One of the things my husband and I were part of was a founding of a public radio station there in 1980. And even then, we knew that that was important. So we had a Saturday afternoon show on the public radio station called Sabadito Alegre. And there's a sociologist named Ken Erickson, you may know him, and he was on that because he was bilingual. And, we just had a lot of people that really had an investment in the people who were there. You probably know the indigent clinic was there.
Yeah.
And then down to the city wanting to make it work, they established a cultural relations board after the Ford County study that Dr. Stoll did. And I was part of that for 10 years. Even to the point where the Muslim women wanted to swim, and they were going in with their burqas and everything. So our committee purchased Muslim swimwear that they could use when they were there. And they were just so grateful. It was just that one little gesture that made people so grateful for being there, and to say, we're welcome here, we love this place. And I was just interviewing for the chapter on African women, and the one lady said to me, we're so proud to be here. This is just the best place in the world. After we had interviewed the people in the apartment complex that would have been bombed, one of the imams said, well, in our country, we would be dead, but this country protects its people. And it was just so simple for them, and we're all shaking in our boots thinking, we're just really thinking that we just really escaped this. But
Barely, yeah.
He just thought, well, no, that's what happens in America. It wouldn't have been in my country, he said, but in here we're protected. So I just think that long history of working side by side with the people that you knew needed to be there if we wanted to eat beef, if we wanted to use wheat, if we wanted to do, it was sugar beets at one time. So I think that's what I think.
Great. One thing, as I mentioned earlier, our goal in making the film is to get this message out, and we're distributing it for free online. And here's a little card. I'd like anybody who wants to tell somebody about it. There's a little card with the website, and I'll just leave some of these up here, and come take one. If you know anybody that would like to see the film, send them the website and they can see it. If you could pass these out. Great, thank you. If you could pass them over to somebody else.
We need to start wrapping this up this evening. Is there any final questions or comments? Thank you all for coming, and thanks so much, Steve, for the work that you've done.
And thank you, Linda, for arranging it.